Imagine when you share your darkest hours, they become someone else's light. I'm Jennifer Lee, a global community storyteller, host, author, and survivor, guiding you through genuine, unfiltered conversations. Together, we break the silence, shatter stigma, and amplify voices that need to be heard. Each episode stands as a testament to survival, healing, and reclaiming your power. Listen to I Need Blue on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite platform. Learn more at www.ineedblue.net. Trigger warning: I Need Blue shares real-life stories of trauma, violence, and abuse meant to empower and support. Please take care of yourself and ask for help if needed. Now let's begin today's story. I was introduced to Everyday Feathers by a friend who invited me on a walk to support this meaningful nonprofit. Their mission, supporting families facing a dog's cancer diagnosis while promoting mental health through the love of dogs, immediately resonated with me. The walk was a powerful experience. Surrounded by nature, dogs, and a shared purpose, I felt a deep connection. Dogs aren't just pets, they're family. They offer comfort, reduce loneliness, and help us stay present, playing a vital role in emotional healing. Later, I reconnected with Laura, one of the organization's directors of Everyday Feathers. A former teacher and now a licensed school psychologist, one of the most critical roles in her career has been offering mental health support to students in the aftermath of traumatic events. Living in South Florida, Laura was among the mental health professionals called upon after the devastating mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland in February 2018. In the days that followed, as she supported grieving students, she witnessed firsthand the powerful and calming impact therapy dogs had on the school community. Amid unimaginable loss and trauma, these animals brought comfort, stability, and healing. It was in that moment that Laura realized the profound role dogs could play in supporting our collective mental health, and she was inspired to take action. Everyday Feathers was born from that realization, a mission shaped by need, fueled by compassion, and driven by the healing power of the human-animal bond. I'm so excited to continue this discussion. Without further delay, welcome Laura, and thank you for being my guest on the I Need Blue podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be a guest today. I am thrilled to have this opportunity to talk to you.
Me too. First, I have to ask, did you have pets growing up?
I did not have pets growing up. I grew up always wanting animals, always wanting dogs. And I had my first dog when I was a grad student, a Cavalier King Charles named Colby, because I watched Lady and the Tramp as a kid and always wanted a lady dog. So Colby was mine, but I always wanted labs. So I didn't get my first lab until my adulthood. And that was Furry. And we had Bella, who was my partner's lab as well. But my first dogs were adult dogs.
And how did having your dog change your life?
Oh my gosh. I don't know that you know how a dog changes your life until you have one. And I think not having dogs until I was an adult was very different than maybe if I had grown up with animals. The love, I don't think I was ready for the amount of unconditional love that your dogs give you. And that's just the best. Plus, always having a partner to go running with you, or when you come home and having those happy faces and tails wagging. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, it never gets old and they never stop being so excited.
No. I mean, I go out to the car and they're like, "You're back." I was gone for 30 seconds.
Absolutely. What part of healing did your dogs bring you through this process?
That's a great question. And I don't know that I knew the impact that they had on me until I didn't have them with me. We had three dogs, Colby, our Cavalier, Bella was our Black Lab, and Brody was our Yellow Lab. And Brody is the inspiration for the foundation, which I know we'll talk a little bit about. And they were a part of my life for 14 years. So having dogs for 14 years and you come home and you have a bad day and they're always there and they're at your lap, it's a responsibility of, I have to take care of the dog today when you're not having the best day, and just being able to have that routine. But then when they're gone and they're not there, I think then you realize what the impact they were. Because we were almost 2 years before we had another dog in our life, and really the absence of it. And now having a dog again, Jackson, who's our Yellow Lab, it's just so much joy to have him. So I think the impact of healing they have is just them being who they are by nature. I think at the end of the day, the animal and human bond is amazing. I think when kids see dogs, they light up. I think when adults see dogs, they light up.
Absolutely. We could probably talk about dogs all day long, but I would like to ask you about you and your career.
For sure.
It's going to lead us to where you are today, and we definitely want to talk about your nonprofit, Everyday Feathers.
Yes, I would love that.
Yes. So you started out as a high school teacher. I'm assuming that's what you went to college for.
Actually, no. I knew that I wanted to work with children and work in education. So I went to graduate school for school psychology. I moved to Florida for graduate school. I went to Nova Southeastern University in a part-time program that was at night and weekends. So I needed a full-time job and I wanted to be able to work in the field. I had the wonderful opportunity to be a teacher full-time while I was in grad school. I was a teacher for 3 years, and then I transitioned into my internship as a school psychologist, and then I've been a school psychologist ever since.
What was it like being an intern then? Because that is your first time actually out in the trenches, if you will.
In the trenches as a school psychologist was very different than being a teacher, but it was great. At least my experience, I had a lot of support and supervision to kind of help with the transition and help from being a student to being an actual school psychologist and what that looks like in the days to days. It was a passion that I had through education. I eventually became an intern supervisor myself to be able to provide that education and support to up and coming school psychologists as well. So just being able to be full circle and be able to continue the passion of educating others in my career as well.
Mm-hmm. What was the greatest piece of advice that you were given that you passed on?
Our job is very involved. We work with students one-on-one. Oftentimes there's a lot of trauma or emotional components to it. So just being present with the student that you're working with and being present in the moment of who you're working with, whether it's a parent, a teacher, a student, just be present.
That sounds great advice for life in general, doesn't it?
It's hard advice.
Absolutely. And it's kind of like you said, like dogs, they're present.
They're present all the time. They are very much right here in the moment. And I think that's one of the things we can learn from them.
Absolutely. They fill a void for sure. So how many years have you been a school psychologist then?
I just finished my 15th year.
Wow.
Yeah.
When you first started, what types of situations did you find yourself assisting in?
So one of the biggest roles that a school psychologist does is crisis response and mental health support during crisis. It varies. It could be anything from an unfortunate accident. It could be an illness. It could be a passing of a teacher. It could be something like a school shooting. And it wasn't until 2018 where it was local for a school shooting where it became very real. We had, of course, learned about the history of them and learned about different responses and case studies when we were in school and through different trainings that I did in graduate school and then on the field in terms of the training I got as a professional. We do a training called Prepare, which is just a very specific type of training that we do during crisis. But most of the crises I had worked on and supported schools with up until that point were car accidents of students, passing of faculty members, so more localized. The first experience I had working with a larger incident was Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in 2018 when I supported down in Broward County.
Can you share a little bit about what you learned in the Prepare program?
So it's a training that's put out through the National Association of School Psychologists, and it's to empower and train school psychologists and other educational professionals, just for safety and response. So on the prevention side, there's a whole element of what schools can do to promote safe spaces. Our specific role was more, what do you do in the moment when you're working with students, when a crisis has occurred, when a disaster has happened? How do we handle and basically do psychological triage to assist students to making sure that they are safe and that they are okay, and if they need additional mental health support? It's the idea of, how do we work with students one-on-one? How do you work with a group? How do you handle the stress of the staff? How do you work within the community, depending upon the size of the crisis that you are working with? And really that varies depending upon the nature of the crisis. So it's very specific, but it's also, it just gave us the tools and the empowering to make sure that we are able to support students. As a psychologist, evaluating what is the proximity of need. Maybe it's a person passed away, but nobody at the school knew that person, or so maybe only one or two people might be affected. So it might just be pulling those two individuals and talking to them one-on-one. It could be a student within a particular class passes away. I've seen those situations where it's just an illness. And so then maybe you're just working with the class. It could be something school-wide where multiple students were hurt, which was an experience I had, which we can talk about too, and the use of therapy dogs that I saw there as well. And then you need more psychologists to come in and support, because then maybe we're working within the classroom specifically, but we're also working with small groups and individuals. So it's really an evolving situation. We're trained to be able to ask questions and find out and figure out what sort of supports are needed, because at the end of the day, it's always just making sure that the students feel safe and their mental health needs are being addressed.
For such a catastrophic situation like what occurred at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, how many school psychologists would you estimate were brought in to help the students and the teachers and their families?
I worked at the time of that incident. That took place in Broward County. So Broward County schools handled the majority of it. But because it was so large and so many students were impacted, I worked for Palm Beach County School District at the time. Many of us from Palm Beach County volunteered our time to go down to assist, because they just didn't have enough support, as well as you get to a period of time where, as a responder, you also need to take a step back. So the number of people that were there, I don't recall. There was a lot. My role in that particular event, there was a middle school on the same campus as the high school. The week after the shooting, the middle school reopened, and all of those students returned to school for the first time. But even though they were not present in the high school, they heard it, they saw it, they knew the community, they knew the students. So they've gone through that trauma. And it's, how do we help these students re-enter into, quote, normalcy of a school day when something so traumatic has occurred? My role as part of that was assisting with that middle school and getting those students assessed and worked throughout the day. It was the biggest crisis that I had responded to in my career.
Right. And you said something really important, which was everybody's there to support the students. But when you came in on a volunteer basis, you also were there to support the other responders and give them a break.
Yeah.
Yeah, for their mental health.
Because even when that's going on, the other schools in the county are still open. So there was also, surrounding schools and communities that needed support from that as well. So if I recall, those school psychologists were assisting within the community as well and responding to their own schools. So it was just being able to support that. And there were several of us from Palm Beach County that went down to assist, because we're neighbors. And I started my career in Broward County as well. So I just personally felt like This was where I did my internship. This was where my first few years of my career was. It was a no-brainer when offered to us to support that I was going to support as much as I could.
I think what's not realized is the impact on the community and communities that an incident like this has. And so everything you just shared brings a different perspective, that it wasn't just high school and those students and those parents. It stretched much further than that. So thank you for sharing that. Do you remember the moment you first heard the news?
I was actually at a doctor's appointment, and I left the appointment to multiple messages asking if I was okay, because the news that broke across the country was there was a school shooting in South Florida. And so my family didn't know. So they were reaching out to me if I was okay. And I was like, I'm fine. So that's how I found out about it, was getting text message alerts and then communicating with friends who were in the area, then just going home and watching the news and being like, we couldn't believe that something like that was within, our neighborhood. You hear about them in other parts of the country, but until it hits home and affects your community and the people that you know, it becomes very real.
And what emotions then were you initially dealing with?
I think initially it was shock. I think anytime there's a traumatic event, your first response is shock, whether it's something to this magnitude or just some bad news that you receive. Our human instinct is disbelief. And then it becomes one of concern of who was there, who do we know that was affected, what impact was that? And I think that kind of sits with you for a while. And I think that's true of any sort of traumatic event, of just trying to figure out what's going on and how do you work through it and how do you navigate through it. I remember, so going back to the dogs and the healing, my partner was away for training, and I remember sitting with my dogs, and not realizing at the time the healing that they were giving me, but just knowing that they were there, kind of as a support without me realizing it at the time.
Right. They were just present for you in that moment. When you arrived at the middle school, what did your supportive role look like?
So I was working in a library, which was set up as kind of a triage center for students to come in as they needed. A lot of times we would do it individually, but for this situation, we were running in pairs. I remember I actually had an intern with me, but we were working together to kind of make sure that we were appropriately assessing and working with students as they were coming through. So I went 2 days, and it was just very busy, in the sense of we were seeing a lot of students, and some students multiple times during the day. And we go through, the process of kind of letting them tell the story to us. And we ask kind of similar questions that you're asking me, like, what was it like? What did you feel? Because you want to be able to kind of acknowledge what they're going through, but at the same time, we're assessing, are they having a quote unquote appropriate reaction to something like this? Are they being able to explain it? Are they able to talk through it? But at the same time, we ask questions to make sure, have they had experiences with this? Also, what kind of supports do they have? Do they have a parent at home that they feel safe talking to? Who do they feel like they could see at school if something comes up? Because at some point, that support that we were offering was going to be fading out. And we want to make sure that those students who might continue to need support have it. And then from there, we can make assessment of this individual might need more than what the school is offering. They might need more long-term because of maybe a relationship with a victim, or because they don't have supports, or because maybe they didn't know what was going on, but something else happened in their life that's triggering a response. So we're kind of going through all of that while we're working with students, because at the end of the day, we want them to go back to class, but we also want to be mindful and respectful of what they're going through and as they're processing it. And that was really the first time that I saw therapy dogs in action, because it was wonderful. There was a organization that came down and they brought their golden retrievers, and they were available for whatever we needed. And so we got to a point where some students were having a hard time opening up with us. And so, you know what, like, let's go take a walk. And we could take them down to the therapy dogs, and they would sit there, maybe pet the dogs for a few minutes, and maybe they would release some emotion. Sometimes they would cry, but it was whatever they needed the dog to be there for. and the power that moment allowed for students to start healing, or for us then to be able to work with them a little bit more, was incredible. I didn't realize at the time what I was like thinking ahead for my future with this, but I knew the power of therapy dogs was going to be something that I was going to want to continue to promote. And not to jump too far ahead, but it became something that later in my career at another crisis at a school that I was actually supporting personally, one of our school resource officers showed up with me to support, and he had a therapy dog. And we started to incorporate the therapy dog as part of our overall response, and just knowing the impact that that healing can complement what we can do as mental health professionals was just incredible.
Wow. That almost brings tears to my eyes to think of a child wrapping their arms around the neck of a dog and just holding it and kissing it, and in the safety that they must have felt in that moment, in a very unsafe moment. Do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And I mean, I see it through the lens of being in the school, but my conversation with the officer at the time, and now doing more research, is how they're using therapy dogs through law enforcement when there's children involved, especially. It's just, in courts, and having the dog sit there if the child has to provide testimony. It's just, the dogs allow you, I think, to a point to relax, because the energy that they produce, again, that unconditional love that they offer. And I think just the tactile of petting a dog. And we know research shows that that elevates good hormones in our body. And it's just all of those things combined, the healing that they offer us is incredible.
Earlier, you mentioned another situation, one having to deal with a car accident. And this tragedy occurred at one of your schools.
It was 4 students who were hit, but 2 survived. That was just different because it was the first time it was one of my schools, and in the magnitude of that, and having to assess, and it was the day after spring break. It was a high school, and we're getting into testing. There was a lot of energy around the school in general, and then this happened. So we had 4 students that were hurt, and we found later in the week to succumb to that. So it was the emotion of, okay, I have to step in, and this is where we're working with. And I personally quickly would go into like an assessment. All right, my psychologist hat is on, my person hat gets left behind, and I will work with that person later, because I go into how am I going to support the school? How am I supporting these students? And so it was planning with administration and the other team at the school. So like the school counselors, because they're able to assess as well. And then, like I said, we had a school resource officer who had a therapy dog who showed up too. And so he was part of the planning, and he called in some of his colleagues from the local sheriff office with therapy dogs. And I was like, we're using them with our psychological assessments. So we had thought dogs that went into the classrooms. And we also had one dog that stayed down within the central location also to provide support for students when they were coming down by themselves. And I believe also, like during free periods, we had one of the dogs kind of just walking around, just kind of keeping an eye out. Like, are there any students that we think might be affected or need? Because we're constantly just wanting to make sure that students are safe, they're stable physically and emotionally.
And how long are the dogs typically then at the school supporting?
So in that situation, I can only speak for myself. I don't know that that's an event that's used anywhere else. For that particular, we had dogs at the school all week. And then at the end of the week, we kind of reassess and kind of check in back in, like who still needs support, how much support is still needed to kind of manage the immediate emotional support, and what can the school itself handle.
Okay, thank you. And after these incidents, how is Laura when she takes off that psychology hat?
That's a great question as a follow-up, because I said I put on like my work hat and then the other one. That's where, and something we teach students too, you have to engage in self-care. You have to be able to put yourself first. This one's where I might go for a day, if it's just kind of like a debriefment, go for a walk. The time, for Stoneman Douglas, I had my dogs at home. So it was just going home, taking care of them, kind of trying to get back in my own routine. But I do remember after that one, after working on the second day to support students there, I met up with friends who were in the area. as well. And we just kind of talked about it. And I had to go through my own, what was my experience? How did I feel? How was I able to go through that so I could get that out? And then kind of just be like, all right, I've processed this to the point I remember at the time my supervisor reached out to me and she's like, can you come next week too? And I was just like, I can't, because I have to put my emotional self first. And I've kind of worked through that. And I'm at my emotional capacity to support, because as a giver, you have to be able to know what your limits are, because it can quickly burn you out. And I'm grateful to have a partner now. Like after the incidents with the 4 students at my school, he knew. Like I remember getting home from work that day and he was like, all right, we're going for a walk. We're going out to dinner. We're going to the beach. You just need to be able to check your own mental health in those moments.
Yeah, I love that you self-advocated, because that can be the hardest thing for people to
Yeah.
do when you're a giver.
And especially as like an empath, as people in the educational field, as women, like we just want to be able to continuously support. And so you have to kind of know where that balance is.
Let's talk about everyday feathers.
Yeah.
How we can get the word out for
Yes.
you, because you have shared so much firsthand valuable information of how dogs are healing.
Yeah. So Everyday Feathers, the Everyday Feathers Foundation is inspired and for my dog Brody, who was our yellow lab, who was with me through many of those traumatic experiences. He's just the best yellow lab. I could talk your entire podcast episode, as I'm sure anybody could come on here and talk about their dogs. But we lost him about 4 years ago, unexpectedly. He was 9 to cancer, a short time from the time he was diagnosed to the time we lost him. And the day after he passed, I found a feather on the road. I never find feathers. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And then I kept finding them. And the more I found them, someone started telling me that that is just a reminder he's with you. So the idea of the feather is that Brody's spirit is always looking out for you. And there are these everyday moments, being able to highlight that. But the idea with the foundation was, during that time period when he was ill and we lost Brody and we were grieving, we got a lot of support from our community and our friends. People showed up with dinner. Brody loved to get puppuccinos from Starbucks. People sent us gift cards for Starbucks so we could spoil him. People dropped treats off our door. Our friends let him go swimming in the pool. So the immeasurable amount of kindness that came out of such a moment of grief, and it was something that I have sat on and I've wanted to just pay that forward and acknowledge people whose their dogs are going through a cancer diagnosis, because it's traumatic. And to know that they're not alone. There's sometimes when people are said, well, it's just a dog. Well, it's not just a dog. Dogs provide us that unconditional love, and they're our companion and support. And so when you lose your dog, you're losing your unconditional love and that emotional safety. One of the main focuses of the foundation is to be that support for families when their dogs are going through a cancer treatment. We do care packages called Brody's Blessings to families when they need that support, which is currently, it's typically a gift card for dinner. So it's one less thing that they have to worry about, as well as some toys and some treats to just spoil their dog. As we grow, the expectation is going to be to help financially support some of that treatment cost, because it is can be very expensive. Really being able to help support funding for research for cancer treatment, cancer prevention for dogs. But then also, full circle, I knew that I wanted to bring in that healing aspect of dogs. So the other element of the foundation is to really support the use of therapy and service dogs to support mental health. I shared earlier the amount of support and the incredible healing power I saw with therapy dogs, but service dogs do the same, and being able to be that companion, and whether it's emotional support or a true service animal, it's really empowering what dogs can do. And so really the mission of the foundation is to be able to spread that hope, kindness, love through dogs, and to really support families in a variety of mental health areas.
Beautifully put. And how long has Everyday Feathers been in existence?
So the idea has been in my head for a while, but we started in September when we officially became official. And we're just slowly growing now. We're just trying to get the name out there and get, families we can support and then also funding to support us carry our mission forward.
And how can we help you?
So our website is www.everydayfeathers.org. We are on Facebook, which is Everyday Feathers, and Instagram is at Everyday Feathers. So there's social media. And then from the website, there is currently a link to donate, of course. And then there's also a link on the homepage to a form to refer any families for the Brody Blessings care package. We're also building out supports for grief. That's an element that I didn't initially plan, but it's such a huge support that I want to support is when we're seeing these families, with a cancer diagnosis for their dog. That's that shock, that disbelief we talked about earlier when you're in trauma. But then that animal will pass. And then there's that grief of now what? I want to be able to offer that support as well, building out what that's going to look like. I've done some remembrance trees for the pets just so that if families know that their memory will live on, but we're building out support to address the grief component as well, because that is very real.
Yeah, I love that. You have really brought in a lot of the human elements, like you said, the planting the tree and things like that people do when a loved one, a person passes away, and you're bringing that in now for our pets, our dog. And I love that. So,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Grief is just love that has nowhere to go, which is something I heard about after I lost Brody. It's just you just have so much love. And I'm hoping that through Everyday Feathers, we can take that grief somewhere beautiful and being able to help others through that.
Absolutely.
Just check us out. Please support us. Please support us so we can help others. And most importantly, if there's somebody that we can help, please let us know.
Laura, thank you for being my guest today on the I Need Blue podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a true honor.
You're so welcome. And thank you for listening. This is Jen Lee with the I Need Blue podcast. To learn anything and everything about I Need Blue, visit my website, www.ineedblue.net. And also under the resource tab, you will find the information for Everyday Feathers, as well as in the show notes. Remember, you are stronger than you think. Until next time.